Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, I'm Tom Dillon, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Helen Leathers. Good morning, Helen. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. I was just thinking we could just record that bit because we say the same thing every time, don't we?
We do.
We've got that pattern of, hello, I'm Tom Dillon. But yeah, it's live. We're here. Just in case you were wondering.
Yes. Okay. What are we talking about today?
I don't want people to think that bit's recorded.
Good. It's not. We just edit out the bits where you can't say my name.
Yes. Today we are talking about narrative coaching.
Narrative coaching.
Yeah.
Now, I have no idea what this is. No. So
very few people do.
I'm interested.
Yeah, it's one of those off-Broadway coaching approaches.
I like that phrase. I like that phrase.
So it's rooted in the idea that we all live our lives through stories. You're good at storytelling, aren't you? You have lots of stories.
I quite like a story, but also I really buy into the idea of the story we tell ourselves, the Brené Brown kind of phrasing of that. And I've used that. I use that quite a lot.
Yeah, so the idea is that those stories that we tell ourselves actually will come out in the coaching if we allow them to. And they are the stories that they challenge us, they challenge our perception of the world around us, don't they? So to hear those stories is good. That's kind of what narrative coaching is based on.
Okay.
So we're going to break that down a little bit, see how it works, why it's such a transformative tool for personal and professional growth in the coaching room.
Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Yes.
What is narrative coaching?
Well, I guess at its core, its aim is to help people to reframe their stories and retell their stories in a way that's helpful for them and kind of empowers them to make lasting change, which is what we're all about in transformational coaching.
Yeah.
So it's not kind of, the operational coaching of, I've got to get this done by next Wednesday. How am I going to do it? It's about understanding their psyche, where they're coming from, what the stories are that they're telling themselves, what they're telling other people, and how that starts to shape their lives.
Interesting. Is it possible that we do this without knowing what we're doing?
Yeah, I think we do.
Yeah.
And I think we train people to do this as well without calling it narrative coaching. So one of the things that we do in Tom's Code as a framework, we get to the situation, and it might happen at the beginning, but if we get to the situation, then that's a space for people to tell their story. And I don't interrupt their story. I want to hear their story because I think there's lots of rich information that can come out of that. But a lot of, I hear a lot of other coaches that go, well, I'm not interested in their story. I just want to get to how do they change? How do they move forward? What they've told their story before, they know their story. That's not new. But actually there's something in there that we can pull out and play with and explore. So I think it's definitely worth listening to the story. So it's definitely something that we do anyway.
I have so many questions and I don't want to interrupt your flow. No, I was just thinking that we've got so many tools that allow us to challenge some of the assumptions and the storytelling that people do. So how much of narrative coaching is also that challenge?
Yeah, it's about reframing. So definitely we are going to be looking for elements that come in, the patterns that come in, the assumptions that people are making. Yeah.
Good.
So if we think about people that do come into the coaching room, and if we give them that space to tell their story, quite often it's a story that they've told many times to other people. We're probably not the first person to hear their story. They've practiced it, they've rehearsed it, they've refined it, they've embellished a bit in certain places. On our previous episode, we talked about unconscious bias. So they will have used a self-serving bias to tell their story, so that they tell a story that serves them and serves their reputation. So that can be interesting. So they might over-dramatize it, often painting themselves in that, maybe sometimes a victim light. That's,
if it serves.
Yeah, if it serves them, because that gives them attention. Or it might be a defender of justice, or it could be the hero. There are probably not going to present themselves as the villain, but Could be. So if you think about the drama triangle that we talked about in episode 72, we looked at those dramas that show up. So someone might show up and say, oh, this is terrible, this is happening to me, there's nothing I can do about it. So they're in that victim mode. Or they might show up as the rescuer saying, oh, I've got all these people that I have to look after and it's down to me and I have to do everything. Again, seeing themselves a little bit as a victim, but in a very heroic way. So I think those stories start to come in. So the drama triangle is all about the drama, which is all about storytelling, isn't it?
Yeah. I do recall a few years ago when we were driving up to Scotland for the Edinburgh Fringe, when that vehicle overturned in front of us.
Yes.
And I remember you saying to me afterwards, I wonder as we tell that story in the coming years, what will happen to the narrative around it, like the distance between where we were and where the vehicle was and so on, because you're very aware that we do those embellishments.
I have a very clear recollection of dragging the old granny from the RV that was on the side.
Wasn't you?
Pulling it. No. In my head.
Anyway, back to narrative.
Fortuitously, there was a mountain rescue person on hand that said, leave it to me.
Yes.
I know what to do. So we went on our merry way, headed off to Edinburgh.
We did. I did call 999 though.
You did.
I did do that part.
You were the hero.
Thanks.
So if that sort of drama, if that storytelling comes to a narrative coaching session, then we're going to treat that individual as the author of their story. It is their life, their story. So we work with them to explore their past experiences, their beliefs, their values, all those things that are going to shape the story they're telling. And we're going to think about how they tell a better story in some senses. Sometimes the story they're telling themselves isn't helpful. So we're going to try and help them to understand and create a deeper meaning from the story that they're telling.
And perhaps find some new perspective.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's very much about perspective taking. And again, I because I hear a lot of organizational coaches saying that they're not interested in the story, I think, well, how do you really get a sense of someone's perspective unless you're prepared to listen to their story?
And the story just tells so much about someone's values, someone's beliefs. You can get so much information from that. So what are the origins then of this coaching approach?
Well, as with a lot of the approaches that we explore in coaching, they have their origins in therapy. So narrative therapy has been a thing for the last 45 years, something like that. So it started off with the work of Michael White and David Epstein. So they're the pioneers of narrative therapy from, I think, Australia and New Zealand. I can't remember which way round they are, but they're definitely from that part of the world. And their approach was based on the idea that people understand their lives and make sense of their experiences through their stories. And that those stories shape their view of the outside world.
Which I think we can all relate to. So what are the key elements then?
So if we think about narrative therapy, the key elements were the stories that we tell ourselves. So that belief that the individuals are the authors of their own stories. Externalizing the problem. So rather than identifying a person as the problem, then narrative therapy really emphasizes separating the person from the issue they're facing. So it's that coach the person, not the problem.
Yeah.
It allows individuals to see their problems as external and therefore open to change. And then they will look at reauthoring the story. So this is where we work to reframe, rewrite the story, and particularly if it's limiting or harmful. So again, I think that's something we do quite naturally in the coaching room. It's part of the approach that we take anyway. But that's probably some of the origins. And it obviously has some crossover with a person-centered approach.
Yeah.
So I think it's borrowed a lot from that, allowing people the time and space to talk.
And that reframing, understanding new perspectives, we could weave in so many other approaches there. And the one that jumps to mind on the reframing is that cognitive behavioural approach to pick it apart and find a new way of thinking about it.
Although I don't think the cognitive approach is good at that, picking out someone's behaviours, but it's probably not quite as good at letting the story unfold, is it?
No, I suppose I'm thinking towards the end of that, in that if you've let the story unfold, the reframing at the end of that.
Definitely. Yeah. And changing behaviours as well.
Yeah.
Which might then change the story.
Yeah.
So obviously narrative coaching has borrowed from narrative therapy. So all of those elements are included in narrative coaching. And that was really taken forward by David Drake, who again is from Down Under. And he sort of since the 2000s has been the main advocate of this narrative approach to coaching. So I think it's seen as his thing. I mean, it's not copyrighted or anything, but I think if you asked anyone that knew about narrative coaching, who is one of the most well-known exponents, it's David Drake. So worth looking at his stuff. So he suggests that through coaching, individuals can better understand the narrative they're living by, and that they might choose to rewrite it, so that they're actually living more in alignment with their values and their purpose. So really, what I tend to think is it has quite a lot of echoes of transactional analysis, because transactional analysis is about those scripts that are created from before the age of 7 that we start to live by.
Okay.
And then we just keep playing out the same script. And in relationships, we start to play out the same script. So the story becomes one that we're familiar with, and we keep returning to it and keep playing it out.
Yeah, I can see that.
So in transactional analysis, they might talk about you having a losing script. So that's the script you created for yourself up to the age of 7, and that's obviously going to be down to relationships and experiences before that age. But the idea is that you carry that with you into adulthood and continue to live as a loser if you have a losing script, and almost keep self-sabotaging yourself so you fulfill the script.
Right. And so narrative coaching can help you to understand that story and then recreate a new story potentially.
And the same applies to transactional analysis. That's the whole point of TA, is that we don't have to keep retelling the same story, that we can create new stories.
Yeah.
But it's that recognizing that it takes work. So if the story that you have comes from childhood and it's just a story you've carried with you, we're not going to undo it in 10 minutes.
No.
So there's a lot of work to be done, I think.
Yeah. So can you give our listeners an example of what narrative coaching might look like?
Yeah, so if you imagine someone who's struggled with self-doubt for most of their life comes into the coaching room, so they might present the current situation that's challenging for them and straight away go to that narrative of, well, I'm not good enough. So that could be where they start off. And I think we've all had coachees that come in that frame of mind, that they always fail, that life never deals them a good hand. Now, in narrative coaching, we're going to be allowing them space to tell their story, and we're going to be listing out the themes that come up in that narrative, the patterns of thinking, the emotional reactions, and any behaviors that are showing up. And if we give them that space and allow them to talk uninterrupted and without giving them advice, then I think those patterns, those behavioral patterns, those thinking patterns will start to emerge. They might not recognize it for themselves, but we can start to explore it with them, and maybe play back some of what we're hearing. So I think sometimes in telling their story, even if it's a well-rehearsed story, in saying it out loud and being allowed to finish without someone jumping in and going, wow, you know what you need to do. I think sometimes that realization can come from there of, oh my God, I'm telling that story, and actually what I'm doing to myself is this. But sometimes because it's such a well-rehearsed story, they don't have that recognition. So it's down to us to play back what we're hearing and not to judge, not to make assumptions, not to try and change that in the moment, but just to play back what we're hearing. And quite often we will have coachees that say, I didn't know I was thinking that. And suddenly the playing back is what allows them to recognize their story and how unhelpful it might be.
And I'm struck by the idea of the difference of listening, because if you tell your story to a friend and maybe you've told that story many times, they probably switch off a bit. They're not interrupting you. Whereas in the coaching space, not only are we not interrupting, but we're deeply listening. And when we deeply listen, whether there's playing back or not, I think it allows the coachee to deeply listen to themselves and I've always said being heard is healing, and I think that it sounds like that very special space of being deeply held, deeply heard, and being allowed, like you say, to get to the end of it will probably for many people be the first time they've really, really heard their own story.
Yeah. I don't think if they were just... The story that they will have rehearsed that comes into the coaching room is a story they've probably not got through with anyone else. They've just been shut down, or in some way someone has interjected.
Yeah.
And it could be that they're just agreeing with how awful things are and kind of bolstering that story.
But then there's also the friends that go, oh, no, that's not true. And because they don't want that person to be in pain, or they don't want to feel guilty about perhaps not being there for that person. So there's a stop put on that for some people, isn't there?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, as I said earlier, that idea of just listening draws on Carl Rogers' work, that unconditional positive regard, that being non-judgmental and just giving them a good listening to. And I think it also allows for emotions without trying to fix the emotion, accepting the emotions there for a reason, and it has something to offer the coachee. So obviously there's some work to be done to understand the emotion, why it's surfacing, and then how it's supporting the coachee or how it's not supporting the coachee. But it's being comfortable with the emotion and allowing it to come up, and not trying to, when someone becomes emotional, not trying to shut the emotion down. So I think that's another important part of it. That I think for a lot of coaches, they struggle a little bit with having that emotional display from someone.
Yeah.
And they want that to go away. But we kind of know that it surfaces for a reason, and it will dissipate as well, just as quickly. And they'll carry on with their story. We don't have to stop the story because someone becomes emotional. So if we provide that safe space for someone, without them having to defend themselves, we have that robust container that allows the possibility of change for them. I think that could be really empowering.
Yeah. So what other aspects are there of narrative coaching?
Again, brought the person-centered approach in, and I think also Gestalt coaching has something to lend here as well. So it's that focus on the relationship. So Carl Rogers, in Talk About the Person-Centered Approach, talks about that connection between you and the person that's talking to you, that's really important. And in the Gestalt approach, we talk about the I-thou relationship. So it's that connection. It's what's going on in the space between two people and what's being said. There's something happening in the relationship. So I think that's, again, something that's part of narrative coaching, is allowing that relationship to emerge and be part of the coaching.
It sounds lovely.
Sounds lovely, doesn't it?
Yes. It strikes me that I thought we didn't cover narrative coaching on our training, and we don't as a highlighted kind of headline, if you like. But it's so intrinsically connected with the other approaches that we teach, that effectively we do teach narrative coaching.
Yeah, because if we do just focus on the story, again, without rushing to fix, and obviously there comes a point in the coaching where we want them to be moving forward. So we're not going to perpetually listen to their story. It is, we're providing that space, that safe space. But I think quite often people are going to then realise that they have a part to play in their story, that they're an active agent in their story, that they have some responsibility for the story that's unfolding, and they actually then might start to take responsibility for what's going on, and for understanding how other players in the story might well be reacting in a way that they think is unhelpful, but they can start to understand why that is happening.
Yeah.
So if you think about the drama triangle, that's a way of exploring the story. I mean, in some sense, we're trying to get rid of the drama if we use the drama triangle. But if we think about the Gestalt approach, we might well use the empty chair exercise to explore the story from someone else's perspective. So if you've got just two players in the story, being able to sit in the other person's chair and tell the story from their perspective can be really helpful, just to bring that awareness to play, that while someone might have that self-serving bias and tell their story from their perspective, there is another perspective at play.
Yes, because one whole story is made up of the story of every individual involved, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're never the same story.
No.
I've done enough mediation to know that there is no objective truth. The truth lies in the middle of everyone's stories. And if you, say if it's a story that's been told over time and repeated, it will be embellished, it will be changed. Every time we revisit a memory, it's a creative process. So we change the story and it becomes a different story.
Yeah.
And if you think about families coming together and telling stories about things that happened years ago, quite often people just have the wrong story.
Oh, yes. So many times. Remember that time when that's not what happened? Yeah. This happened. Oh, it's... Yeah.
But those are the stories that become part of our life and they influence how we live our lives. But then we might have totally misremembered the story.
Yeah.
There's a lovely, I think her name's Carol Travers, who wrote a book called I think it's The Marvelous O. But anyway, she has this memory of her father reading her that story when she was a small child, and that her father died when she was quite young. So has that deeply embedded memory of her dad, and that meant a lot to her. And later as an adult, she picked up a copy of the book on a bookshelf and read it and realised it was written after he died. Wow. So that memory just didn't exist, but she'd kind of... confluence of a memory of her dad and a memory of the book, she'd paired them together. So
must be a bit upsetting.
But I think that's the thing, isn't it? That the narrative, and obviously the problem for us as coaches is we don't know what is true in the narrative. We are exploring it, but we're still only going to hear that person's story. We're not going to hear the story from anyone else. Not like mediation or 360 feedback, where we get to hear how other people think of that person. But I think if we can do that exploration, and I think actually Gestalt is a really good way of approaching it, to maybe look in as an object on the wall and go, okay, what was going on between those two people? If you look in on that scene, maybe imagine you're a movie director and you're filming that scene, what's going on between those two characters? Then we can start to really unpick what's happening for our coachee.
Or another story.
Yes, or another story.
So we've talked a little bit about what it is. We've looked at some of the parallels with other approaches. What's the process of narrative coaching?
I think most simply it's allowing someone to tell their story. Whatever that story is, we're going to sit and we're going to listen. We're then going to explore it with them. So we might be looking at metaphors that come up, some thinking patterns, some behaviours that we're noticing. So we're going to explore that with them. We're going to deconstruct all of that, see what's real, see what's not real, see what's helpful in that story, looking at limiting beliefs, things like that. And then we're going to invite them to tell a different story. And to re-author the story is the phrase that would be used. And perhaps tell a story that is more empowering and more helpful for them to move forward. It doesn't mean we have to make stuff up, but if the story is not helpful, then creating a different story and creating a different role for themselves, I think, can be really helpful. And then integrating that story into the way that they start to behave and move forward. And I think that's another interesting thing about narrative coaching, is it kind of accepts that it's not a quick fix.
Yeah.
So we're not, and I think this, so often I hear this, so motivational interviewing is kind of the prime example of where I hear people say, oh, well, it could be a one session thing and it's all done and it's over and they're fixed. Solution focus is similar. And I don't think that's real. I think I might get really lucky and someone might have a moment where they go, oh yeah, well, I just need to be different, don't I? And they go off and be different. But the chances are that those stories are so embedded and come from younger life experiences that it's going to take some unraveling. So over time, we can start to work on them and see how those stories. I'm actually seeing someone tomorrow who I've been coaching for the last 10 years. And I still now, 10 years on, and we've done lots of good work, but I still see some of the same story coming through 10 years later. And we've done work on that. So it's not immediately going to go away. And when I bring it up, do you remember 10 years ago? I go, oh yeah, And so we have very limited time with our coachees. If we have an hour and a half and we have that, once a month or once every 6 weeks or something like that, they're living a life beyond that. And so the stories are getting reinforced outside of the coaching room. So there's much work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. So what sort of benefits do you think there are to this type of coaching?
As with any of our transformational coaching approaches that we use, I think it's about facilitating their empowerment, the ability to change, and recognizing that their history is not their destiny, and that they do have the ability to change the story and to live in a different story, to tell a different story. So I think that's the main benefit, but I think it helps them to get some clarity on what's real and what's not real, and how they're showing up within their own story.
It sounds, like I say, it sounds very similar to what we do. And just in visiting it, it sounds really powerful.
Yeah, I think it is what we do. It's got a different name, but I don't want to call, we talk about transformational coaching, and I think that's what we do, because we do also invite other approaches in. So solution-focused approach, transactional analysis. We're not saying, narrative coaching is the only way that you can coach people. But I think it's definitely part and parcel of the way that we coach people, is to allow them to tell their story and to explore the stories with them, and hopefully change the story so that it's a better story for them.
Yes.
Good. So let's wrap up. So I think, just in conclusion, the stories that we all tell ourselves are really powerful. They shape the way that we see the world and the way we navigate the world. So I think if we can allow our coachees to tell their story and to work with them on their story, then we're going to do really good work in the coaching room.
So if you're interested in learning more about narrative coaching, or if you'd like to dive deeper into how this approach could benefit you or your clients, don't hesitate to reach out to us at Your Coaching Journey. We're here to help you on that journey. And would like to say thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you very much.
Next time on the podcast, we're going to be exploring more thinking, aren't we?
We're going to be exploring a tool in the coaching room. We haven't done a tool for a little while. We're going to be looking at the 6 thinking hats, Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats, which I think most people will have heard of somewhere along the line.
Yes.
It's used a lot in management circles, but people don't tend to really know what actually happens.
I have no idea.
So yeah, we're going to explore it.
Excellent. I look forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.